I'm the Executive Director of Lakewood Alive. I'm really pleased to be here in partnership with our friends here at Lakewood Public Library. They always do a really nice job in supporting us. Also, the Lakewood Community Relations Commission. It's really great to have a partnership with those folks who've done so many great things with April and her team. We're really glad that we can have this conversation about diversity. Diversity in Lakewood, as you all know, is not just about race, and that is critically important. There's approximately 32 languages spoken at the high school, but it's so much more. We are so socioeconomically diverse in our community, from folks who are on the low-income scale to those who are very wealthy. Our housing diversity is very diverse from when it was, not the vast majority, it was built prior to 1930, but nonetheless, we have diversity in our housing stock. We have diversity in our businesses, in our commercial building stock. We have so many different types of diversity, so I think it's really exciting that we're going to talk about that tonight. So before I go on any further, I'd like to ask Mayor Michael Summers to come up and join me and just say a few words.
To engage in an important conversation. We think about four major goals in Lakewood every day. One of those goals is vibrant neighborhoods. And when we think of vibrant neighborhoods, we think of vibrant neighbors. In fact, we think of neighbors working as truly in the spirit of a neighbor, which is looking after one another, understanding one another, and helping and sharing in the quality of life that might be differently defined but important to each neighbor. And in a place like Lakewood, which is very ranked from 1 to 19,300, Lakewood ranks number 125 in terms of population density. We know there's a whole lot of us in a very small amount of space. So it's really important that we work hard to get along together. And by and large, we do a very good job of that. But we can always do better. And we know that the nature and complexity of our society is changing. And the fact that you're here indicates you understand that. And I am certain I'm going to learn a lot. I'm hoping that you do too. But our challenge is to take the lessons that we gather today and take them into our neighborhoods and help them become the vibrant places that they need to be even more so in the future. So I thank the panelists, and of course I thank the leadership of Lakewood Alive for their continued engagement and direction and opportunities for us to advance our understanding of the society we live in and the community that we want to build. So thank you for being here.
I also want to recognize Councilman Dale Miller here with us. So Dale, thank you very much for being here tonight. The Lakewood Community Relations Advisory Commission also has offered, and they're here, to have some volunteers to help us out. So they help to check in, and they will also take the note card. So you all should have received the note card with a little golf pencil. As we're having a conversation, you think of a question, please jot down that question. The volunteers will then come around, collect them, and then they will give them to the moderator, and then she will be able to ask the panelists. So we'll have some time for Q&A here at the end. Please write down your questions. I also want to recognize our Community Forum Committee. We have some wonderful board members who have been helping us out, chaired by Cindy Einhaus of Beck Center for the Arts. Cindy Friedman is a board member, the owner of Dependable Painting. And they have, that committee has really helped to make sure that we stay grounded to where Lakewood Alive was originally founded years ago, before I ever came to the area, talking about the issues of the day. And the board years ago said in a strategic planning session that we want to be committed to talking about the things that are happening in Lakewood. And I said, that's fantastic. We need a committee of board members to help us do that, because we are a really small staff. I'm fried right now because we just ran a volunteer project planting flowers. We can only cover so much ground. So to have a board to be able to help us out with that is a big deal. So we appreciate that we have a strong committee that helps us have these conversations that are important. So enough about that. Without further ado, I'm really excited. Tamika Taylor is here with us. And when I said, what should I say? What's the one bullet point? I got to say it. We're debriefing, or pre-briefing, if you will. She is a super awesome person, and we're really excited that she's going to be here to talk about this. If I could please ask our panelists to come up and join us up here at the dais. For Tamika, if you would come up here, please. We welcome her.
Sit on the stool, so that way I can see everyone's face. So welcome to our panel this evening. I'm very excited about it, looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. We've got as we begin, there's a few guidelines that we're going to kind of keep in mind as panelists, as well as you present your questions later. One, no one is here to speak on behalf of the group. So everybody is an expert in their own experiences, so everyone will be speaking and using I statements as we engage. Also, I'm going to ask everybody to listen, listen, listen. And I intentionally say that 3 times because often when somebody starts to share their experience, and it's not my experience or something that I think differently, I'm already starting to get my rebuttal together versus listening to them all the way through. And absolutely, we can share those differences in experiences, but definitely listen to the person all the way through. Become aware of judgments. It's a natural thing as we have been exposed in our different communities, to our lives, our experiences. We all have judgments at different times. And so own them and then just let it go, okay? Be self-challenging and self-responsible as we engage in conversations and think about what's bringing that on for you personally. And we're going to have really honest conversations while we're respectful of one another as well. And then I'm going to say for the next hour and 15 minutes that this is our Vegas, that we honor confidentiality, we don't share anybody's personal stories. Absolutely, we want people to take the learnings away, but not share anybody's personal stories. And then while obviously, because I've made this my life's work, this is very important stuff to me and topics, but also life is short. So let's have a good time tonight as we dive into this very serious topic and very timely in terms of the things that's going on. To kind of level us off and get us all started, we're going to look at some definitions so that as we throw words around, because one thing about language, sometimes we throw things around and they mean something to us and they mean something very different to someone else. So we're going to talk about it in the context of here. Out at the table, there were some half sheets with these definitions, so if you want to grab it on your way out, if you didn't get it on the way in, or I'm sure there's volunteers that if you wave your hand and you want them, they'll, I'm sure, bring them to you. So the first one that I want to start off with is just diversity, because that's a word that we hear and we throw around a lot. Very simple, it's the differences and the commonalities amongst us. And that, going back to what Ian said in the introduction, that could be on so many different levels as to what that diversity means. The thing about diversity is we don't always have to be intentional with it. That diversity can just happen when we just all show up in the room. When I look out in this audience, we all showed up here. We didn't orchestrate who was showing up, who was doing what, and we've got a diverse room and a diverse group of people. So sometimes it can just happen without intentionality. Let's talk about equity a little bit. So equity is about fairness and justice in the way that people are treated, as well as the access that people have to opportunities and things, okay? And so really thinking about who has opportunity, who has access, who does not, and why is that access there or not there as we think about equity. Very different from equality. And we often use equity and equality almost simultaneously. And the reality is they're two very distinctive things, because when I think about equality, it's about everybody having the same amount of something, treating someone equal, everybody just splitting it up. So one of the things that I like to think about is an example with bus fare. So if we were to go out and catch the bus, and I had these two women that wanted to catch the bus, and the one in the burgundy had a quarter, and the other one had 75 cents in the blue. If I was being equal, I had $1, I'd give them each 50 cents. They need $1 to get on the bus. Guess what? Because I was being equal, guess who's still going to be walking? My friend in the burgundy. Versus meeting her where her needs are, I would give the quarter to one and the 75 cents to the other. That's when we talk about the difference between equity and equal. Because now, everybody's happy because everybody's on the bus, not just the one person. The next word that I want us to look at and think about is the word bias. And bias is a prejudice that is in favor of or against a thing, a person, or a group of people when compared to another group of people. And it's usually in a way that's unfair in terms of things. And so when we think about and talk about bias, there's two different categories I want to break that down into, just for the simplicity or complexity of this conversation. One is about implicit bias, which is also known as unconscious bias. And that's a bias that we're unaware of. It just happens outside of our control automatically. Typically triggered in our brain, by our brain, when we're making quick judgments about people or situations that are influenced by our backgrounds, our environment, and or our personal experiences. Which, when you think about those influences, is why my biases will be very different from Deborah's biases, because our experiences might put us in a different place in terms of that. And then we've got explicit bias, and that really refers to attitudes and beliefs that we have about a person or group, but it's on a very intentional, conscious level. So we are very well aware of it versus that unconscious one. We don't know until somebody pulls our coattail, which we have to do is pull each other's coattails about those biases. And then the last word I want us to talk about is inclusion. We hear, years ago, you used to hear about just diversity, but now you hear about diversity and inclusion, because what we've learned is diversity is not enough. Once again, I talked about diversity just happening. Well, inclusion is about respecting and valuing and appreciating people for their diversity. And in that case, we've got to be pretty intentional to make sure that people feel a certain way and feel included. And so it is about our behaviors, it is about our intentionality. So I like to think about diversity as a noun and inclusion as a verb, because it is about our actions, it is about our behaviors. And no matter what our role is within an organization, we all can be inclusive in our behaviors because we all have our sphere of influence. So that's what I'm going to leave in terms of vocab pieces as we begin to engage in this conversation. Also, I want us to think about diversity and what that means in the context of this conversation tonight. Here in Northeast Ohio, when we talk about diversity, what's the first aspect we typically go to? Race, absolutely. And I always say that we're very complex beings. And race is one piece of my identity, which is definitely key and important to who I am. But I'm much more complex than that. I've got so many other aspects of my identity. And that if it was only about my race, life would be simpler. It wouldn't be simple, but it would be simpler. But we're very complex beings, and so we've got to think about more than just that. And then here in Northeast Ohio, when we break race down, what's the two categories we typically break that down into? Yep, white and black. And my concern about that is that if we only talk about black and white, how many people are we leaving out of the conversation? A ton of people. And so we've got to think beyond race, and we've got to think beyond black and white. And so tonight, as we talk, we're going to have conversations beyond that as we engage. You know, it will be, and we can hit stuff in terms of gender, our abilities, sexual orientation, religion, age, socioeconomic status, education, geography, family structure, profession, and I can go on and on in terms of the things that make us very different. But I'm not going to do that because you also came to hear some other people speak as well. So we're going to begin to engage with that. So our format for tonight is that we're going to have some discussions based on questions. We've got some pre-questions that we're going to begin to talk about. Everybody's not going to answer every question. We've got typically two people will engage and jump in on each of the questions, and then we will have an opportunity to get questions from you. And I know we talked about your cards, so please feel free to write those down and come up with some good stuff, because we're ready. We're ready.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Gabrielle Jackson, and I am one of several members of the Lakewood Community Relations Advisory Council. And one bullet about myself is that, just what our moderator said, I am more than just my race. We have a diverse group, but there's so many intricacies and complexities and crazies about me that I hope that everyone is willing to.
My name is Murat. I am with the Turkish Cultural Center here in Lakewood. I was born and raised in Turkey, and then I came to the U.S. right after high school. So this is my 18th, going to the 19th year. The way that I summarize my journey is that I was a visitor, then I was an alien, if you know what I mean by alien. That was a category by the government that it's given to you when you have a legal status in this country. So I was a student, I was an alien, then I became a permanent resident, then now I'm a citizen. So this is my journey over 18 years, and then I can go on and talk about each of the journey. So, but thank you very much for being here, and then looking forward.
My name is Chase Milio. I am a Lakewood High School senior. One thing about myself, this was my last day of high school, or translation, my first day of freedom.
So he thinks. We gonna bust his bubble.
Walters, I'm the founder of She Collective. One thing, I guess one takeaway that I'd like you all to leave with is that this is just the beginning, that I really hope that opens up a lot more opportunity for conversations.
Why do we celebrate diversity? And why don't we start at the opposite end?
For me, I think it makes life more fun. And I think it's a way also for us to learn about ourselves better. You know, I think it's really easy, like as a white person, to be like, I want to welcome in all different kinds of people so they feel welcome. But then but flipping that lens and saying, but I'm also benefiting from diversity, from equitable access, when people have equitable access to things. So I think that it doesn't just benefit other people who are different from us. It benefits all of us.
So many different things about us that makes us unique and diverse from one another. So what better way to celebrate diversity than talk about our own selves and our own paths and our own journeys, to speak with other people and see how that differs, but how it brought you to the same exact place in the same exact.
I just want you to understand, until maybe mid-year, let's say 9th year in this country, I did not know that I was part of the diversity, because every conversation that I was part of is about white and black. So I as a visitor, as a permanent resident, I said, I think I'm not part of the diversity talk. But as we get into more deeper in the community and getting to know one another, then we said we are part of that diversity conversation. So, and since then I've been celebrating diversity, and my friends, my members, my community is celebrating diversity because it helps us to get different perspective and get to know one another better. And for example, there are some issues in our country that we talk about always: gun control, let's say opioid addictions and all of that. Maybe getting to know one another, if we include some of those diverse communities, diverse people into the conversation, maybe we'll have a solution. For example, all of those issues that I'm looking at from as an outsider, but I was never invited to a panel or a conversation where how we're going to address the opioid addiction in our community. Maybe those diverse communities have an idea for the community that will maybe help just a little. It's not, but again, if you open that door and invite everybody to the conversation, I think maybe we will solve some of the problems that we have in our society. So that's why we should celebrate diversity and then help our next generation to come and embrace that celebration and be part of it.
Ooh, man. I second that motion, Mira. Great. I think I agree with everything that everyone else said. We celebrate diversity because it really helps make the community stronger. If you look at Lakewood, we have different ethnicities, we have different owners of businesses, different socioeconomic statuses, different ideas and opinions, and everyone, when they have that seat at the table, can help make Lakewood stronger, and any community stronger. So I think that in order for us to grow and learn and overcome some of the issues that we have as a community, like the opioid epidemic, like poverty in certain instances, we have to work together, we have to embrace our own diversity and share that with
So
others.
bias is one of those things that, people sometimes want to act like it doesn't impact them, but the reality is, like it or not, we all have bias and, at some level. And so I want us to begin to talk about bias and how do you examine your own biases, and what suggestions do you have for the audience in terms of them examining and handling bias? You want to start that one, Jay?
Yeah, I
Okay,
would
great,
say,
thanks.
I would say, like go for the advice for the audience, I would say if you're examining your biases, know that every person is unique, and that regardless if you have an obvious bias or you're not even thinking about if you're biased or not, just understand that every person is unique, and that's what you should be biased towards, the fact of the possibility of the relationship that you could have, and get to know this person that you might never expect that you wouldn't. Just be open-minded, be accepting, be willing to try new things. We're in Lakewood, that's kind of what it's about, I guess.
Very good question, because up until I received the question, I never asked this question. I asked this to myself. Do I have my own biases? And then I went back and see. I think I treat everybody the same way that I've been treating, except again, coming from Turkey. I was born and raised in Turkey. I was always surrounded by Turkish people, like Muslim people, and not a lot of other ethnic groups or religious groups. So my first, I would say 2-3 years here, I did not know how to act or how to behave or how to greet people from other cultures or religion. But it took a while to get over that, because I learned through interaction where I attended a lot of these events where I just went and asked, and then it would probably go with my suggestion that if you don't know anything about a culture or religion or person, anybody, just go up and ask. And don't be shy about it. I mean, that's who I was 20 years ago. But as I get older, I learn how to not to be shy, be open about it, and then don't pretend, because pretending is not helping at all. So just be up and straightforward. And that's what my American friends did, how they behaved towards me when I was in college. I had a lot of great American friends who just straightforward asked me, who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you not dark? Do you have camels in your countries, and all of that? So those are the questions that my friends asked me straightforward, because I knew that they wanted to learn, because they were very honest and very genuine. So my suggestion would be definitely be involved in every community events that you can be part of it. Don't be just shy and say, oh, it's a Ethiopian event. Should I go or not go? I mean, just go, because again, those are the events that you will go and learn a lot. And since then, maybe last 5-10 years, maybe I attended over 100 events, 100 cultural events, that I learned a lot. And I became a better person with just learning from other cultures and other religions.
I'll be very vulnerable and transparent and say that I deal with my own implicit biases a lot on a constant basis. And I have to check myself routinely in certain situations. I am an advocate for social justice and criminal justice reform, and in that mindset, fighting for something that I believe in that targets a specific demographic of people, I always am coming at it from the defensive perspective. But when I check myself, I'm thinking, what's going on the other end? What is it that I don't know? I've learned a lot being on the Community Relations Advisory Council from some friends. I have a friend that went through a police training program, and he shared different scenarios and perspectives that he was in that shows how people react in certain situations. And I'm thinking, well, how would I react if I was in that situation? I agree with Murat, my friend, again, who I keep going after because he's amazing responses. Regarding making sure that you're opening up the floor for conversation and that we're working together and communicating with each other regarding these biases, asking questions like, do you have camels in your country? But also checking yourself if approach to that question, and not being defensive all the time. Can I touch your hair is something that I hear a lot. And I'm thinking, wait, can I touch your your hair? No. But instead of being defensive, just explain, it's a cultural thing. I don't really want anyone touching my hair, but that's something that I have to check myself on. And there are many other things. So each and every day in dealing with biases, whether it's something that I'm perceiving or something that I have internally, I have to check myself.
If you don't mind adding one thing,
No.
if you get a question towards anything about diversity or cultural religion, you will know if it's an honest question or not. Because again, I've been through that a lot, and I know the difference between good question or a straightforward question and why did you say that type of question, right? So I just want to put that out because we do go through that as of today in the community, because as soon as they see your accent, they have a reaction. And then I have more stories to tell you about that later.
Great, thank you. So I'm not gonna make you go beyond the line.
Oh, no, you're good. I was backing that
We'll
up.
let you go first this time. So what are some of the assets around diversity that Lakewood has to offer?
I think Lakewood has a lot of different assets to offer. I live in Ward 4, have an amazing council person, and that's probably one of the most densely populated communities as well as one of the most diverse communities. I have several different family groups, socioeconomic statuses living just in my apartment building. We have a lot of great business owners that I've gotten to meet that are, first generation business owners in the city of Lakewood that have amazing stories and really like to share their culture with different folks that come in. So Lakewood has a lot to offer, but I think there's a lot of opportunities for growth as well, and making sure that people know that Lakewood is really inclusive and welcoming to all these different groups of folks.
As part of the Turkish Cultural Center, this is our I think 8th year in this community. So since the first day, I just want to say thank you to Mayor. Mayor has been very supportive. He has been to the opening ceremony with his family, and since then we try to get involved with any initiative, any community activities that happen around Lakewood, and receive a lot of good feedback from the community. And our promise since day first that our center is open to everybody from Lakewood if they want to host any event. And that's our promise that we still keep as of today. Since then, it's very active. We try to be active in any initiatives, any community programs that we see. We don't have a lot of members live in Lakewood. Our members go through Lorraine Manor. So Lakewood has been our center, the headquarters for everything that we do. One thing that I want to add is important that if you remember not too long ago, 2-3 years ago when we had the election or when we had this political division going around the country, that I received a phone call from your mayor saying that we should do something. I lived about 5-6 different communities up until this year. I never had any phone call from any mayor. But your mayor reached out to us and said, you know what's going on in our today's political thing is very bothering. So let's get together and then do something. So what we did last year is that it was around this time again. We got together for a Ramadan celebration. We observed a Ramadan iftar dinner at the community center with about 100 people in Lakewood. So these are the things that I think we should do more often to tell the other.
You could just walk down Detroit. Like, there's so many, from small businesses to large chains. There's the Beck Center that allows young minds to explore what they are talented in and what they're passionate about. You have restaurants as simple as Burger King that you just go to, pick up a job application. It all helps with inclusion, It gives many people, different groups who are coming here for the first time, the opportunity to receive employment in other parts of the world where they may not be. I think that's one of the beautiful things about
But
that.
I think that we are missing out on valuable ways to engage people intergenerationally. And I really love that this is an intergenerational conversation. And that's part of the reason why I started She Collective, is because trying to bring in people from teens and preteens to self-described crones, just all along the age spectrum, because I think that when we talk about diversity, it's not just diversity for our kids, but, we can learn a lot from grandparents and what Lakewood looked like when our grandparents lived here. So I think the intergenerational aspect in these types of conversations, you can benefit.
Was coming from downtown to Lakewood, is more challenging. No, I'm just joking, I'm sorry.
I told you we were gonna have fun.
I will go back to that race issue, and then I think, again, community relations and April, you guys do a lot in the community in terms of reaching out to others, but I think we still we're still focused on the race rather than reaching out to other religious groups, so to say. For example, I see a lot of immigrants and refugees in Lakewood. That they don't know nothing about city. It's not their fault to not to reach out. It seems like they don't have anybody that they're coming and knocking their doors. For example, last year when we were hosting a dinner at the center, right next to our building, there was an Iraqi family living in that building. So they knew some ladies who were covered walking into the building, and then your wife and husband saw, they said, oh my God, these people are probably Muslims because we saw some ladies covered. So they walked into the building. So until that time, they did not know that right next to them there was a Turkish cultural center. This refugee family just walked in, and they were just so happy that they saw somebody, they met somebody who are similar to their culture and religion. So since then, we've been involved and we've been trying to help them, because they have no English, very limited English. They have their kids, very few English, they go to school here, but they have no resources at all. So they rely on friends, neighbors, us, if they need anything. So I think in terms of diversity, we need to reach out to those other maybe groups more often, maybe a little more active, let's say, community relation department with authority. I'm not saying we don't have authority, but if you have the authority, you come from the city, you come from the county. I'm with the county that is specialized in reaching out to immigrants or refugees. It will make them very comfortable just seeing you enter their door. So maybe just one area.
I like that you started off saying that, well, everything you said is, but that, it's not just about race. And I think that we have some great programs for disabled folks, for women, but what's missing, and I think that's not just Lakewood, I think it's everywhere, is the fact that, what about disabled people who are also people of color? Do they feel welcome in these programs that are meant for disabled people or people with disabilities? And so I think, and Tamika, you mentioned this, how you have many different identities, right? And I think that and it's complicated, there's not an easy answer, right? But I think it's important to bring this into the conversation. How can we make our programming more diverse, and that we recognize that there are intersections of identity that are important. And if we create a program that's for one specific type of identity, is that simultaneously leaving out a group of people? Is that leaving out people because they're Muslim and they don't feel included in this type of conversation about women because, they look and there's only a room full of white women. So I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about programming targeted to specific groups of people, but recognizing that there's everybody has many different intersecting identities. And like I said, there's not, I don't have an answer for you, but I think just having more and more conversation about this is a way to move us forward and create programming that actually is
It
truly.
all starts Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, whatever Ramadan that you celebrate, talking and having serious conversations with your families. Because the kids that we are seeing now, they're either fostering or overcoming some of the things that they were taught growing up. And we can see it all the time in the media now, especially when certain things are happening in our political climate. We have to have those uncomfortable conversations with our family. If you were raised in an environment where, and there's some people that just have to, like, again, check yourself, be honest. Some of us were not raised in households that were inclusive, that talk about diversity. We were raised kind of harboring these implicit biases. You don't speak it outside of the home, but it was a conversation in your home. And you have to push back, be brave enough to push back against your family and have some real conversations about someone that you met at a center. I think all the programs and things that we have to kind of break down the barriers, the mayor does a great job. We have so many elected leaders and community leaders that do a great job, but the onus is on you to help break down the barriers.
So I want you to think way back to your high school experience.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
Okay. Glad you go there with me. So I want you to think about, though, what is life like in a high school? Would you classify it as being accepted and welcoming environment or not? And tell us why, and give us any examples.
Yes and no. It is accepting in the sense that there are teachers like Mr. Lavazzo over here.
Yeah.
I'm Mr. Lavazzo. Who are more than willing to help students with anything they may need, regardless of whoever they are, wherever they come from. Mr. Farinelli, my drama director, he runs the Barnstormer Drama Club, which is big on colorblind, and we actually just did 1776, if you don't know what that is. It's a musical with all men and 2 women, and it was split right down the middle where we had half men, half women who were playing old white people in Continental Congress. So he's big on gender blind and colorblind auditions. And there's race and diversity, and there's all these clubs that you have all these opportunities, and you meet all these new people who are more than willing to help you. And then it gets to the point where there are going to the no side that it's not always accepting. There are people who are not as accepting, and they're not as open-minded, and there's a sense of ignorance in the student body at times. Me, being bisexual, at one moment I could be called this horribly awful term, and then I could be called a homophobe. It's different, and so there's not a lot of acceptance, but there's more acceptance. It's weird. It's just a community of 1,300 people, so not everybody's going to have the same viewpoint. And you're in there with each other 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, so you're going to get annoyed and you're going to see people you don't like. So, but then I'd like to think that the good outweighs the bad.
So, Murat, I'm going to start with you this time. What are some strategies and/or programs that are working to promote equity?
New members. New members mean if they come straight from other countries and they're new to this country, we do something with them where they will feel welcome and comfortable right away. In the business world, they call it onboarding. So we try to speed up the onboarding fast by including them into volunteerism right away. What means that if you have a program coming up next week, and if they arrived yesterday, we say that, go rest, do whatever you want, but we want you to be at this event doing this job. And they understand, they're very positive about it, because we want to make sure that they are included in this community right away. And what also we tell our members, we give them, of course, a little time, about week 2, 3, or whatever they need. We say, make sure wherever the community that you live in, the street that you live in, you reach out to your neighbor or your neighbors, because it comes from the culture and religion that you are supposed to know your neighbors. And we say, not 5 doors down, we just say, go 2, 3 doors down, up and down, straight, straight across the street. Let's just make sure, just not, I'm gonna say, hi, I am this, I'm new to the neighborhood, I just wanted to say hello. 90% of the time, people say, oh, thank you. Sometimes, right before you move in, the neighbors also come to you. So we have different communities that have different examples. What we tell them is that don't just, I still have some people, friends that I know in the community that live on the neighborhood for 5 years and don't know their next door neighbor. It bothers me so much, as I say, that I tell them, do you know your next door neighbor? Do you know somebody in the street, across the street? Because it is part of the being neighborhood, being a vibrant neighborhood. Because if we don't tell them, if we don't include them in this volunteerism, they're gonna feel excluded. They're not gonna enjoy their time in this city or in this country. So we wanna speed up that process right away so they will feel welcome within, I would say, a month or 2. Because moving to this country and then being part of the community takes about a year or 2 to feel welcome. So we want to speed that up and then make sure that not only the adults but the kids. Kids have no English, but they are quick to adopt because they have 0 prejudice. And that's what we're trying to just focus on. And also we have sister family project that we do, and that's something else that I can talk about later. But if I live in Lakewood, if somebody moves into Lakewood, I adopt that family right away. So I am with them every day. Phone call, text message. If they need to go to the license bureau or the social security bureau, I take them everywhere. And then I help them about a month or 2, and then.
We collaborate with different groups like Lakewood Alive for events like this, and we also have several programs throughout the year. One of our programs is called Welcome to Lakewood, and this is usually out of a high school, and it is what it is. It's for folks that have been living in the community as well as folks coming to the community. We have different vendors set up. We would love to make sure that we have your group set up this year to share information and help people get acclimated to the community. It's open to everyone. Another really great event that we have is our diversity potluck. We usually have that in January or February, and it's where you can bring in food to share with a large group of folks that represents your culture, your aspect of diversity, even though we know that's just one part of diversity. And it's been a really great way to foster conversation, for people to get to know folks that they didn't know.
Now, I was never personally affiliated with the Beck Center, but I have friends and loved ones who are. And what's amazing about the Beck Center is that you can enroll in a class there, whether it be for art, music, dance, musical theater, acting, whatever it is, even improv, from what I understand. But regardless of it's a great way for a child who is, say, coming to this country from immigrating, coming from a place he is used to, and then going to a place he isn't used to. It's a great way to make new friends, meet new people, find adults who have been here for a very long time, who they can look up to, and they can guide them, and they can mentor them, regardless of race, gender, etc.
It's important to recognize the difference between impact and intent. So Gabriella and Murat both talked about asking questions, and I think that's really important, is being curious about somebody else and getting that conversation going, I think is great. But also, if you offend the other person, even if you didn't intend to, if that impacted the other person negatively, I think we have to recognize that it doesn't really matter what your intention was. And it's important to, instead of getting defensive, to apologize and learn from that. And I think that it's a lot easier said than done. I think it's something that is a skill that's cultivated, not getting defensive, especially if sort of new to reaching out to people who are different from you. But I think that listening, recognizing that intention doesn't really matter as much as impact is one thing, and recognizing that you're also going to make mistakes. I think that having compassion for yourself, and like what Tamika said, that everyone has bias, And there's actually studies that show that if you beat yourself up about having that bias, it's actually counterproductive. That bias is just gonna get stronger. So recognizing that bias and feeling compassion for yourself and being curious about where did that bias come from? Was that from something that, my family instilled in me, or whether that was implicit or explicitly, or something that I see perpetuated in the media a lot. So I think compassion and curiosity for yourself as you're exploring your bias, and if you impact somebody negatively, even if you meant really well, is instead of being defensive, apologizing and learning.
Right. I'm not going to say his name for personal reasons. He came from Iraq in 7th grade, and nobody really wanted to. Some people didn't want to be his friend because they didn't know him. He came from a place that some of them had never heard of. Some of them didn't want to be, or some of them didn't want to talk with him because of the conflict that was happening at the time. And some people just didn't want to, didn't feel like they could go over and talk to him. They didn't feel they were like him. So I pulled this risky maneuver, and I went over and I said hello, and I sat with him at lunch. We had a great conversation, and he and I are still friends today. And you just gotta go in. This is a person, and I want to get to know this person, and I am a person, and they want to get to know me. Just gotta have that mindset going into it.
I would say, but what I would add, we need more Jays in the schools, because we hear a lot about this exclusions and even when kids being excluded, not being part of it. It takes time, and then it comes to bullying, then you have more serious issues. What I would add is that listening, being part of the community conversation, but what we found is useful in exclusive community is that food is united. I mean, when we say we have food, we have organizing a dinner, lunch, whatever, a lot of people show up. And then it's an opportunity for us to get together, talk, and just be open about it. This is just first step. And then if they like the conversation, if they like the food, they will come back. So I love eating. So we start with that behavior where we just invite everybody. Just come as you are. Just like Ruby said, just come as you are, whoever you are, and just be part of that discussion, and then make a decision if you want to be part of it or you don't want to be part of it. But once they start eating food, if they like it, they just keep coming back for it.
Personal style. I think talking, Jay, was a great starting point. I'm also someone that likes to do research on different things. I can give you a brief example. I was raised in a very Christian household, right? And so outside views, especially things regarding other religions and sexuality, were not talked about in my home. So when I was out on my own and went to college, seeing all these different things, I'm like, whoa, wait, what is this? But having those implicit biases about someone based off of how I was raised, I had to make friends that had different sexual orientations and make friends and get to know and ask those uncomfortable questions sometimes for people that have different religions. So be intentional, do research if that's something that you think you should do before going into an uncomfortable conversation.
This person said, Rob suggests asking other people where they come from and what their country is like. However, some people are offended by that question. So how do we ask it in a way that's not?
I don't know any people, when you ask where they're from, that will be offended, but if it's a specific country or religion case, then I understand. But the way that I approach it is as soon as you start talking, conversation will come to how long you've been here or when did you come here. Then we can find a way to just say, oh, you talk great about that country or that culture, would you mind sharing something? Because what happens in my case is as soon as I start talking to somebody, first they look at you, see it as a white person, right? I'm just like any other, and then they notice the accent, and then they get closer and say, where are you from? When you say Turkey, and then they say, oh, are you Muslim? So the conversation carry on, and eventually comes to the point that, or do you like being here in this country? So these are the questions that I get, but it depends on who you're asking and what country they're coming from. It depends. I mean, I can't not speak for another country, but for a person coming from Turkey, as soon as people know my accent, they say, "Oh, are you French?"
And that's the reality of a lot of African American people in this country. It's African American, that's another huge topic.
Ask somebody and they say, well, I'm from Michigan. It's like, no, where are you really from? You know, or you know, their gender identity. If you ask somebody their gender identity and their response is different from what you expected based on how they look, like, don't question that, right? I mean, everybody gets to decide for themselves. First off, how they're going to identify personally, and also how much they're going to share with you. So I think not arguing with anyone's response. And
Just a quick story, if you don't mind.
A quick one, yeah.
Story.
We got some good stuff on this podium, right?
How do you deal with this case? I'm at an international event, eating hummus with an, let's say, American gentleman. We're just talking. He notices my accent. He says, "Where are you from?" "Turkey." "How long have you been here?" 10 years. He paused and says, "You qualify." And then, and I'm just eating, of course. Nothing happened, and then it's an older gentleman. I didn't want to say anything, but and then I said,
Let's talk about socioeconomics a little bit. So we've got a couple questions that are around, how do you think the rising house prices and rent will affect the diversity of the city, both culturally, differently abled, as well as academic?
Depends on opportunity that someone who has been here for a long time and is established and is familiar, and someone who's just getting here and is trying to find a place to call home that isn't from their home. Someone who has been here knows the area, has familiarized themselves with American culture, has figured out how they want to get a career in their country, and then somebody who is just starting to establish themselves as an American might not be as familiar. Interactions could be different, so that could affect how someone gets a job, or it could affect them in a way. I don't know how else to say it, except just like opportunity, where fate.
How do we make sure that people with lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't get pushed out?
We want to move to Lakewood. There's a thriving young professional, folks coming in buying houses, folks coming in renting, but there is that concern that folks are not going to be able to afford their rent in a lot of situations. And so where do they go from there? Are we having certain areas where people can live in? Is it going to be safe? You know, how do we balance this thriving community? We want to bring in new businesses, we want to bring in new residences, but how do we maintain folks that have been owning their houses for a long period of time? How do we maintain renters that are moving in? So that's a political issues we treat as diversity and inclusion. That's a big topic of conversation now, given the world that we live in, both in Lakewood as well as in the grander scheme of things. I think it's having these open and honest conversations like we're doing now, but politics makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. That can be folks within the same party even uncomfortable talking about differences of opinion, things that you want to push back on. But definitely when you're reaching across the aisle, because again, that is a lot of political ideologies are how people were raised. Like those are things that you strongly believe in, and you will fight to the death for them. So I think that, again, it goes back to those uncomfortable conversations, asking questions, and doing research on, well, I didn't think about it that way, you know, trying to get a better understanding and perspective. I can keep you here all day.
I would add is that, rather than looking at national, just look at local. Because every time we see these issues of what's happening, we try to bring it to the local level. When it comes to the local level, the party or it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. Because you build that relationship with the individual. So for example, I have a lot of great Republican friends, and also I have a lot of Democrat friends. And what they try to do is that they try to pull me into their stream, whatever you call it. But there are some issues that I cannot vote, or I cannot be on both. So we're stuck in the middle, where we have friends on this side, friends on this side, and they know that we're friends together. So they're like, okay, choose your side. But I'm talking about the national level. When it comes to the local level, nobody really cares about that. Because in the local level, it's all about building relationship. It's about building trust within one another. And once we have that relationship and trust and love and mercy for others, those politics can stay outside the door and go on in this place.
So how does the city, school system, library, etc., intentionally hire and recruit a workforce that looks like the people who live here?
That was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up, like what we can do in our communities is, have the conversations with our families for sure, but also bring that to work. There's a lot of really excellent programs and organizations on a national level and more local too that will come into your place of work and do equity and inclusion training, and also not just training, but also really picking apart your policies that are at play and your culture at work, and figuring out how you are intentionally, hopefully, or unintentionally, not intentionally, keeping out certain people, right? So, like one of the organizations is trained me in a racial equity training lens, is called Center for Social Inclusion, which has also partnered with Race Forward, and they're national organizations, and they will come in, they go into like police departments, for example, and they pinpoint different policies and that are unintentionally biased against certain groups of people. So I think it would be really helpful if, not necessarily at this specific library, but if there are any concerns about in your place of work, or why, I'm trying to diversify my place of work, but it's not happening. So I would recommend bringing in one of those experts because I think it really helps to have, and is really vital to have those eyes from outside and people that this is their livelihood. And there are wonderful resources to do that. So taking advantage of those resources.
It's about going where the people are that we're looking to be involved. So that's through professional organizations, that's through churches, that's through other organizations that people are involved in who we're looking for to be a part of our workforce. Because we can't expect people to come to us if we haven't built those relationships and went to those places. Also, we can't continue to advertise in the same places and think we're gonna get different results. And so we gotta think about where we advertise and what are we doing, what are the professional organizations we're involved in, what do those things look like? I also think we have to challenge ourselves from a systems level to think about what are our current practices. Are we putting up, whether they're consciously or unconsciously, are we putting up barriers there to involve other people? And is our place a place that people are going to want to come and stay? And so, sometimes being the first has a lot of weight to it. And sometimes there's a lot of risk. I heard you earlier use the word, I don't remember what word you used, but courage is what came to me. Brave is what you used. And it takes a lot to be that first. And we need to make sure that our environments are set up in an inclusive way, that when people come in, they do feel valued and respected and want to stay. And so I could get on a whole nother soapbox, but like I said, the library closes tonight, so I need to stop there unless anybody else wants to add
People could
anything.
say that it's, they're hiring out of bias or out of affirmative action or out of all these things. How I feel, how I've noticed is that the school will hire people who are similar to who the students are communicating with and interacting with on a day-to-day basis outside of school to make the education process more comfortable and more easy, because high school is a weird time. High school is a very weird time. And so having these adults that are similar to adults in your personal life makes it more comfortable, makes it a good transition.
Conversation that I have with a lot of parents and everything in the community is talking about, why can't send my kid there because it's that school or it's on that side of town. How does socioeconomic status play into what you're seeing in high school, or do you see that in high school? Formerly known as that.
Marty, there was this student who, again, I won't name, during the walkout, whose father, and I was talking with this down at Nature's Oasis, on March 14th, a father of a junior at LHS posted on the community page, the liberal teachers of LHS are putting propaganda into our students' head. My daughter will not be participating in this event, yada, yada, yada. And so I feel like they think that we are pushing ourselves, they're pushing us into something that they want done when we have our own minds and we have our own opinions because we're young adults. And I feel like that they need to, that parents should take that into account, that it's going to be our learning experience, and yes, they have a say in it, but you need to take a risk in trying things. Does that answer?
I'm wondering more peer-to-peer, so even before high school, middle school.
Middle school.
What school you go to is a representation of your family and socioeconomic status, and exactly.
Like,
Same thing with colleges, like if you go to an Ivy League or a certain school, you're in higher regard than other schools.
do you mean like more, like going to middle school, more like underprivileged schools?
Right.
It definitely is a factor of what you can afford. It's you, and seeing that I went to Harding Middle School, seeing that that's where I went, that's where my family paid for my education to start blossoming, as you'd say. Those are the people I was around where you can find somebody who is in a more low-income school who is around people, and you put us in the same room, we'll have vastly different opinions on many different things, because it's dependent on what the state is paying for that school, what the state is paying for this school, what programs are offered there and here, all based on.
Sometimes to me with younger children as and I think it changes as they begin to get older, but that middle school, elementary school, that the socioeconomic piece doesn't for them play as big of a role as it does for those as adults. That they're able to find more commonality because they're not talking money, they're not talking stuff in a lot of times, in a lot of ways as adults and as people begin to get older and start to notice what car are you driving, are you even driving a car, are you not? So I think it starts to show up as they start to get higher up.
5 years. Age group 3 to 5, but working with middle schoolers and communicating with older, parents of older children. And that materialistic thing, socioeconomic status, even though they don't know the term for it, that starts at a young age. Who has a new pair of shoes, whose parent got this thing. Kids pay attention and pick up on everything. What the conversation in the home, that comes out through the kids in school. So that's why I'm asking, what's the mindset, what's the conversation? You went to Harding, what's the conversation with someone that went to a school on the opposite end of Lakewood? That type of thing.
What do you all see as some systematic barriers that Lakewood is facing regarding diverse populations? Race, gender, wage gaps, some examples the person has. And what should be done to remove some of those?
Whether it's for a job, if they're feeling like they're being discriminated against in their community, if they are a refugee, if they're not familiar with the community, if they're a person of color, even if they have a different sexual orientation or religion, because there have been consequences that are known, you know, even in our local community, and we cannot ignore that if we want to overcome it and get stronger. So we have to rely on community leaders, elected officials to reach out to different folks. Mayor Summers, I applaud you for calling. I mean, come on. With all of the attacks that have been going on against the Muslim community, it's things like that, and continuing to foster that relationship and let these people know that we're here for you. So the onus is really always on the leaders to do the reaching out. You can't expect someone to come to you.
The one thing that I would add is echo that too also. It's not from top to bottom, but it's also from the bottom up. So it starts with our neighborhoods, with our streets, that we should make sure that we build a very good community neighborhood. Then we can go to people on top and say that, you know, this is our neighborhood, this is who we are, and we just need your support. And then from the top, the challenge is, of course, if hopefully, God willing, Mayor Summers are here in under 10 years, that we see the leaders within our community, within our events, when we do festivals, community, whatever, that we want to see all those councils and mayors and everybody among us, rather than sending emails or showing up at the city council meetings. If we see those leaders within our community, because I have seen a lot of different communities where, actually not communities, but universities, where university presidents are very involved with the kids, that university excels 10 times. And I have seen that from my own university. I'll tell you that later which university, but I had 2 different presidents while I was at that university, where one president was not really active, we didn't know who the president, but the president who came after that, very active with the students, even helped with students moving in. That university that year tripled their endowment. This is just one step, and I'm sure they're doing a lot of different things, but this is what I saw with my own eyes, where that if the top is involved with the bottom, very legal, and spent a lot of time together, I think that's a move forward.
I have a question for the audience, and this is kind of bringing up something that caused a lot of pain to people, but it's an honest question. How many folks knew that there was a swastika painted on someone's driveway last summer? Overwhelming yes. How many folks had conversations within your homes or workplace about this issue with your family or coworkers? That's phenomenal, but I see significantly less hands. We have to do, I think that's one of the barriers that we have, is that people don't have those conversations. We see things happening, but we're not talking about it.
Can I add one thing to it? That's a good start. Here's my question. Before I stood up here, or when I sat down, how many people knew that I was Muslim? 1, 2, 3. So, in your opinion, in your own, excuse me for saying that, unbiased, who are Muslims? You have that preconceived information, knowledge from whatever you see or whatever is portrayed on the written or visual media. So exactly this is what we're trying to do in the community. Not all Arabs are Muslim, not all Muslims are Arab. It's a very diverse community, so they want to be part of this society. So our point is that let's include them in our conversation.
And actually, that kind of led into one of the questions that was actually targeted towards me, thank you very much. It's regarding the difficulties in facilitating good interracial conversation. And in this context, I'm taking interracial in terms of what I refer to more commonly as cross-racial conversations, and how you help groups to overcome those obstacles and engaging in those conversations. And I personally think that there's a lot of racial conversations that are taking place. I don't think there's as much cross-racial conversations taking place. And so, part of it is in overcoming and making people feel comfortable with having those conversations. Some of the easiest piece is once we get people in the room, it's creating that safe place for them to engage. Once people feel safe, then the library and everywhere else is gonna close on us in terms of people engaging in those conversations. And so getting people to talk is the easy part, once we can get people together. The thing that I think becomes most challenging is getting people to listen to one another and let go of right and wrong, to be able to be empathetic to meet people where they are and understand that we all have different journeys and what those journeys look like in that way. So, that was just to answer that question, and as you talked about conversations. So our time is up, okay? Sorry, there was a couple questions we didn't get to. But what I would briefly like is each panelist to just say in 10 words or less, one takeaway or theme that you want us to kind of think about as we're leaving out of here. So it could be either a takeaway or something that's standing out to you in terms of a theme that emerged. So why don't I start?
Well,
10 words or less, everybody. I'm counting.
I'll try. But I have to say this.
You've already got to get one. Dude, you're the first one.
Let's try this.
5 words, I have to say.
This building, this institution, this city provides a lot of great opportunity for people to get together. My only recommendation, and I beg you to take care of it. Take care of your city, take care of your library. I have to say this.
You're done. You're done. You have to talk to people afterwards offline. You gotta get the other people
I'll
up.
be my neighbor, that's nice.
Right, learn that in 10 words or less.
Be willing to challenge yourself and those you love.
Thanks. Bring it home.
Diversity is in our locus of control. That means it's something that we can control, whether it's in our home or work.
This is why they
We
say.
have to do the work. We have to do it.
Everybody, but a couple things that I heard that emerged as the conversation was going on. Making sure that we're building relationships, making sure that we're being involved, that we need to broaden what diversity means. We need to have more dialogues and conversations. And then the last thing is that regardless of who we are and what our identities are made up of, we are all a part of diversity and have a responsibility in terms of inclusion. So, thank you guys very much for this.
Jim Crawford and his team here at the library, they're always wonderful, wonderful hosts, so we one of our community forum committee members, Rachel Cribbs, is here, and she really played a huge role in pulling this entire panel together, so Rachel, thank you. Murat, we are always looking for volunteers, so we will help with the onboarding process. That's how we get things done in Lakewood. And we talk about food, and this is kind of funny but also serious, and this is not necessarily a plug, we have our upcoming Birdtown picnic on the 16th of June, actually preceded by the Battle of Birdtown, a softball game. Mayor Summers is playing. So please join us for a fun softball game where the residents and city officials play each other. Cindy Marks, who I think was here, or might still be here. Cindy, Councilwoman, she joined us and played, and it was a lot of fun. But then it's followed by a picnic, and the picnic is, we get a sponsorship to be able to pay for the food. It's all come as you are. We have hot dogs and hamburgers. It's nothing fancy or honestly very healthy. But it's food, and it brings the community together. And people who we don't otherwise engage with are coming to the park, and they're talking to one another. And several years ago, and this is really kind of a sad story, but it told us we're onto something, and we need to keep doing this. The first year we had the picnic, many of you may not know, when it rains a lot, water tends to flow towards the pavilion at Madison Park. Well, we found that out. And it flooded. And we had a DJ, and he kept lifting his stuff higher and higher, and there's barrels there, and everyone's standing on the tables. And so, we didn't have a great turnout. But we prepared the food, and there were some people there. And they said, well, can we have some extra? And we said, my God, no problem. And then they said to us, because this is the only meal we're going to have today. And we said, this is real. This is very serious. And so we have become even more committed to doing this every year, having this just fun, super chill picnic in the middle of summer. So I would encourage you, please join us in Madison Park that Saturday. The game is from 10 to 12, and we will be breaking bread over not necessarily very healthy food from noon to 2. Everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you so much for our panelists. This is a wonderful